Hi, I'm John Papola, and you're listening to the Emergent Order podcast. On this episode, I have a conversation with educational entrepreneur Jeff Sandefer. Jeff was a very successful entrepreneur before shifting into education, where he worked at the University of Texas, started the Acton MBA program, and now runs Acton Academy, an unbelievably innovative new school that serves K through 12 students in a model that's really like almost nothing you've ever seen before. Full disclosure, my son is a student at Acton Academy. So I'm excited to share this conversation with you, and I hope you get as much out of hearing from Jeff as I get out of being a parent at his school. Jeff Sandefer, thank you for coming. You're one of my favorite people right now because...
Well, right now, good. I'm good.
Subject to change.
That's what Homer Simpson says, so far.
So far.
But
especially because you are the co-founder of my son Mateo's school, and his participation in your school is maybe the most exciting thing in Lisa and I's life. So I'm very excited to talk to you about how we got to the place where we're talking about that and how he's there and how you got to that place in your life. But I want to start with your own education. So how did, you didn't start off in your career of saying, I'm going to be an educational entrepreneur. So how did you get started?
No, I had a very traditional education. I was born and raised in Abilene, Texas. It's a small town. I was raised in an upper middle class family, but that's a little deceiving because we were rich one year and broke the next. My father was a wildcatter, like the movie Giant. So we always lived as if we had money, although sometimes I knew we didn't.
So what does that mean? What's a wildcatter? Because I'm from Philly, so I don't know some of this stuff.
Wildcatter is that archetypal oil man who's going out, and this was true of Dad. Even when he was ahead, he was unhappy, and he wanted to bet it all on one more well. And so... he would bet it too many times on one more well, and then he would be broke, and he would have to go raise some more money, and he would have to drill another well. So I was kind of raised in this interesting, somewhat stable environment in some ways, and somewhat unstable kind of under the surface world. But I went to public elementary, middle, and high school. I went to a large public high school, 2,800 students. I graduated, did very well in school, graduated second in my class. I'm still mad about that. Jim Snow, if you're out there somewhere, I owe you another tenth of a point so I could have won. And then I went off to college at the University of Texas as petroleum engineering. So I was a very traditionally educated person.
And did your dad encourage you to get into, so you said geological engineering, is that what it is?
Petroleum engineering, so, yeah.
Yeah, so... did he encourage you to get into that?
He actually didn't want me to go in the oil business. He thought it was too hard. But I was much more of a throwback to my grandfather and uncle who were depression babies. So I was always worried about being broke. And I was a different kind of oil person when I went into it. I was always playing the other side of the cycle from him. I was a contrarian. He was an optimist. But he discouraged me from going into the business. He thought it was too hard and the business would never come back again.
And place me in time here. When are you graduating from college?
Graduating from high school in 1978, from college in 1982. I then had a deferred admit to the Harvard Business School, meaning I knew I was going, but I had to work for 2 years to return. And I went to work for a large oil company for a year, and then a small oil company, and then went back to Harvard Business School.
So you go to Harvard Business School. What was that like?
Well, it was a wake-up call. 2 of the best years of my life. And, despite the stereotypes, most of the people there were very friendly, extremely smart, hardworking, a lot of middle class, or middle America kids. So it was a wide diversity of people. But I very quickly figured out, while in most of my life, I'd either been able to outsmart most people, and I could outwork the ones I couldn't outsmart, and vice versa. And I got there, and it was very clear very early, there were people who were so much smarter than I was, I wasn't going to have a chance. And there were people who quite literally worked 20 hours a day or 22 hours a day. And I thought I worked hard. I had never, I was blown away. So it was a great wake-up call for me that I needed to specialize. And so I specialized in energy, but that, I wasn't going to be the smartest guy in the room.
And what actually was that? What was getting a Harvard MBA like at that point? Maybe it's changed, but like what did that actually mean? I'd asked my brother-in-law, he'd gotten an MBA, and I said, this is years ago, and I said, oh, does that mean they taught you how to start a business? And he's like, well, no, it's more like we did case studies in like sort of how management worked or something. Like what is an MBA?
Well, most MBAs even today are rooted in the 1950s and 60s in functional silos, and back when you were going to become a mid-level manager for General Motors. I mean, that's really why the MBA was started. And because academia is so frozen, in strange ways, a lot of it's still that way. Now, I happen to be lucky to be at Harvard at a time where a young man named Bill Solomon was just starting the entrepreneurship department with an older mentor, Howard Stevenson. And it was kind of the launch of what became, over the next 25 years, a transformation where much of Harvard's now targeted on entrepreneurship.
Oh, so at this point now, Harvard MBAs are not just case studies for Walmart.
No, it's surprising how much is now around entrepreneurship.
So that's 2 years you were at Harvard?
I was there 2 years.
And you come right back to Texas? What happens next? You didn't get sucked into the Northeast?
No, although I came very close to going to work for a McKinsey partner named Jeff Skilling. And instead, I wanted to start my own business. Had I gone to work for Skilling, who later became the CEO of Enron, and just yesterday got out of federal penitentiary at age 65, I would have definitely been in a cell next to Jeff. But I was determined to start my own business. I had worked for a wonderful group called General Atlantic, then a fledgling, what would have been called private equity, although probably no one even used that term, private equity firm. And today's a $50 billion institution. But I went to work for GA, and they actually agreed to fund my startup out of Harvard. I later found out they thought I was going to fail, and they looked at the $1 million as just kind of a way to hire me to come back. But instead, the business worked, and I didn't have to go to work for McKinsey and Jeff Skilling, and started my own oil and gas company.
So I know you achieved pretty fantastic success at some point.
We were incredibly lucky. We took $1 million and turned it into $500 million in profits in 4 years. So it was a perfect storm of everything going right.
And what does that mean? I mean, when I hear that, I mean, aside from like, okay, that's 500 times, but how does that happen? Like, what was the?
Well, we had a terrific strategy. I was lucky that I'd been at Harvard when the oil business was going to hell, so I didn't get wrapped up in that. I came out at the time when the business was at a low, which is the right time to get in that business. I had a terrific strategy, hired some great people, and got really lucky. And then prices went up. So it was like everything multiplied on the upside, and then I at least had the wisdom to sell at the top.
So you didn't get too greedy in it?
No, because it's a business that has its ups and downs. I had seen that growing up, and I was determined to go out on an up.
So how long did you stay in that business?
That was a 4 or 5 year run. So by this point, I'm now 28 or 29. I've got far more money I think I'm ever going to need. And that's when I went to teach what I thought would be for 1 year at the University of Texas as a professor at the business school, as an adjunct professor. And 30 some odd years later, I'm still a Socratic teacher now at the Acton School of Business. But it turned into a long gig.
So, for so many people, the idea of getting to a place where you technically never need to work again before you're 30 is a dream on one hand, a very envious position to look at from afar in another. And also, it's sort of like a conundrum when I think about it. Like, what did that do to you psychologically? Like, you're still a young guy. What was that like to be like, I technically, I could do whatever I want? Like, how did you find motivation?
Well, and I'd always lived and still do live on not a lot of money. So I'm a miser and that's not a good thing. I mean, I'm a hoarder. So, I was always careful and remain careful. But I did have to think about what am I going to do next? And that was the reason to go teach. I thought I'll take a year. I'll lead all these case discussions. I'll borrow the best ideas from my professors at Harvard, and maybe I'll think of what to do next. And so that ended up being, I'm still doing a little in the oil business. Went over to Russia with Jim Billington, the Librarian of Congress. This is about the time the whole wall was starting to fall.
So early 90s or
early
late
90s.
80s.
Yeah, late 80s, early 90s. I was one of the first Americans into Nizhny Novgorod in Russia. Ended up having 2,000 people selling shampoo door to door in Russia as kind of a side project to prove that the Russians weren't serfs, and they weren't. And then stumbled back into the energy business as a sideline business because I was really teaching and doing lots of philanthropic things, and ended up actually running a multi-billion-dollar investment firm in that, kind of as a hobby.
So what does that mean to run an investment firm? Like what did it actually? Whose money is it, and what's your job?
A lot of it was my money. A lot of it was a wealthy family in New York who believed in me. I actually worked for them the first couple of years for free just because I liked them and thought it was fun. And over time, we ended up making an arrangement that allowed me to invest alongside them. Gave me no pressure to find any deals, so I could only invest in good ones. I didn't have to invest in a certain amount of money, but the ability to do something very large if it came across. And I actually had a video conference with my old partners yesterday. I mean, I still stay in touch and I love them, and they're great people. And so we had a great run for, gosh, a decade of building this firm. And it means finding good oil and gas people, putting money alongside them. And then I was taking drilling reports every morning. So I was a hands-on investor. I was more of an operator than an investor. But we had operations in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Rocky Mountains, in California, eventually in Australia, and really rebuilt that as I was teaching and doing education things.
The oil business is so controversial in ways, if you even leave aside climate change as an issue.
Which we should.
Because that is a rabbit hole. But
no, I'd like to leave it aside completely, but we'll go on.
It's the reason why I say it's so strange is because everyone drives,
right?
Everyone utilizes hydrocarbons,
yeah,
in everything they do, every piece of plastic, every light switch.
As Dan Jurgens said, I mean, it's the story of the 20th century and now the 21st century. It remains a pillar of the modern economy. And anybody who thinks otherwise doesn't understand physics and economics, because it's going to be a pillar for a very, very long time.
So what do you mean by that? Like, what's the physics part of that?
Well, and this is not my area of expertise, but I spent a lot of time in it. When you look at even today's shale oil, or you look at windmills, or you look at solar, the energy intensity, meaning the amount of energy it takes to produce new energy, is very high. And the economics of all of those at scale are somewhere between extremely difficult to, for most of them, an illusion. Will never happen. There's just the amount of energy you can pack into a gallon of gasoline is almost unimaginable. And the only exception of anything greater would be a pound of uranium. And so that just the physics of that much energy in a small place that you can transport are hard to overcome with wind or solar or any other form.
Yeah, it's like I don't think it's easy to forget that you got to store it. You're not going to always use it right when you get it. So the fact that a barrel of oil can sit there as unused energy, not going away or not going to waste.
You have to extract it, you have to store it, you have to convert it. You lose an enormous amounts of energy. I mean, one of the modern wonders is the jet engine, which of course is what we use to generate power from natural gas or coal or other things, is a turbine engine. But you lose a lot of energy when you do that. Takes a lot of you lose a lot in the conversion of heat to rotation, and then on to electricity. So, we're going to have coal and oil and natural gas around for a long time. That's not a political statement. I'm not in the industry anymore. That's just the way the physics work.
It is so strange because when I think about just people's relationship to products that they rely on, it's such a strange thing because like we have this situation where we all rely on petroleum for everything, and we can't. And there's this just desire for a change, but it's also not even clear that the consequences of that change are what we would think they would be, even if it could happen.
Well, I think as humans, we have deeply inside of us a longing for utopia. And, in my case, I believe that utopia is heaven, so it's not on this earth. But I think we have a longing for that utopia on this earth, and it tends to get lots of people, tens of millions of people murdered and schemes that don't work. But I think it's a natural human longing that if we could just do away with all of these things that are inconvenient or hard or difficult, well, that's a natural longing. The problem is that's not the way the world works. If we could just change human nature, everything would be all right.
Right, straighten the crooked arrow of
absolutely.
man, right? Now, you come back to teaching, you're in your late 20s, but you've also been you've been very involved in philosophical pursuits. Did that happen at that early age? Did that come later? Things like being on the board of National Review and...
Well, one of the other fortunate things was I got to be around enough real intellectuals to realize I wasn't one, as much as I might like. Just wrote someone an email today that said, I wish I'd listened to Bill Buckley when he told me, as I was messing with education reform at the university level, he said, be careful, you're dealing with the cheese of some very big rats, smart, articulate rats with powerful friends. And I laughed when he said that, and it's not nearly as funny now. That's what I went through. But being around Bill Buckley and Margaret Thatcher and lots of wonderful people that were real intellectuals made me realize it was nice to have a seat at the table and listen, but I'm not one.
And you said being around. So what does that mean? How did you come to be around people like that?
When it was clear that I'd been financially successful, I'd always been interested from, like most teens that find the way you and I found. I read Atlas Shrugged and was indignant and ready to take on the world at 17 or 18, and stayed interested in those kinds of ideas. And so I wanted to help. I mean, when I made some money, and I remembered that one of my classmates had been a nephew of Mr. Buckley's. Now, at the time, I didn't realize that Mr. Buckley had like 600 nephews because there's so many brothers and sisters, and the Buckley family was wonderfully everywhere. My classmate allowed me to, gave me an introduction, and I went to see Mr. Buckley, and he said something that I thought was, he said, I'm going to help you get involved, and I think you have a great future. But I don't want you to give anyone any money because we treat donors differently than we treat people on the inside. I want you to be a worker. And so I didn't give any money. For a long time, I became known as the person you wanted on the board that would ask hard questions. And then I saw how donors were treated, and it turned out to be really, really wise advice. It was. But then Mr. Buckley asked me at a very young age, I think I was 2 or 3 decades younger than anyone else, to go on the board of National Review. And I had the great chance to travel around the world with him and be around the National Review people.
So for someone who isn't familiar with Bill Buckley or who he is, just give me the background on him.
So William F. Buckley, at age 26, I believe, out of Yale, wrote a book called God and Man at Yale that really pulled back the covers from the modern American university and said, what you think is a Yale alumnus isn't what's going on at the school. We're losing a lot of the moral fabric. And then went on to start National Review magazine, which really was defined the tent for the modern conservative from the late 50s on. Became the favorite magazine of Ronald Reagan, and really was, Mr. Buckley was the convener. He was the person that could get everyone in the room, define who couldn't be in the room. If you were a John Bircher, which were the extremist or a racist or that wasn't okay. And he defined the tent, and for years. And one of the things I loved about him, and I wasn't a close friend. He was a hero to me, and I got to sit next to him. Is he always went to the weakest person in the room and put them under his arm, and I was often the weakest person. So the fact there'd be a big room and he would kind of take me under his arm and sit me next to him. But then I watched him do it with other people, and I noticed when he died, almost every obituary, whether it was written by the great writer George Will or Bill McGurn, so these terrific writers he had brought up as young people, every obituary started when I was 19 and a nobody, and Bill Buckley picked me up at the airport. So his great legacy wasn't even his ideas or the magazine. It was all the young people that he reached out to and helped, like he helped me with kindness, for no other reason than, that he was a kind person.
I might be one of the only people that is constantly working and thinking about free enterprise that has not yet read Atlas Shrugged. I told that to John Mackey, and he said, "I can't believe that you haven't read that book. That's shocking to me. Don't tell anyone else that."
Well, my wife and son read it recently, and it inflamed both of them. So I'm trying. I probably shouldn't recommend people read it because it tends to. For certain people, it sets off a fire inside.
So when you come back, so at this point, so you've come back and you're teaching at UT.
Yes.
And you have already had these experiences with Bill Buckley at this point. You've already traveled. And...
I'm still kind of traveling with him and doing things with them. I mean, for a very long time. But I have had some of those. I've been to, or I'm going to, and have been to Russia with Jim Billington. I'm dabbling about in business again, but mainly spending a lot of my time teaching and building the entrepreneurship department at the University of Texas with a lot of entrepreneurs like myself who were all started teaching. And then by the year 2000, 7 of us were teaching 25% of all the elective hours in the business school. I think they had 100 and something faculty members, and a handful of us were teaching and won the Teacher of the Year award, not me, but all of our group, 11 out of 11 years, and really built this wonderful group of entrepreneurs who loved to teach and, had hundreds and hundreds of young people a year coming through the classes.
So what is an entrepreneur? Like, what's your definition?
Well, I like my old professor, Bill Solomon's, and Howard Stevenson's definition was the relentless pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources controlled. So you're relentless, you care about the opportunity, doesn't matter what you have, you're going to go get what you need.
Has your definition or the way you've thought about what entrepreneurship is changed and evolved over the years as you've taught it? Did you have a kind of defined sense of, I'm going to be an entrepreneur and I know what that means when you did it because of being at Harvard? I mean,
well, I think people do. My experience is having taught a lot of young entrepreneurs is there are really 3 different drives. The drive for me, and this is true for a pretty large segment, was to overcome a father figure. I mean, there's just something. It doesn't matter how good. My father was a great father. It doesn't matter how good a father you are. There's this natural competitiveness, particularly with a young male, but often with a daughter too. To go out there and best their parent. And I've found through the years, that's usually a positive, aggressive force that then once you're really successful must be dealt with. So there's a price to pay for that aggression and that wanting to go achieve, and there's a positive element and a negative element, but it generally leads to success. I mean, because you're moving forward. There's a second type that I found later, and these are people who've had a tremendous adversity in their life. Might be a Navy SEAL, might be someone who lost a parent or a sibling at a young age, might have had a terrible health. For those people, every day is a good day. They go out and work hard, they get things done.
Carpe diem.
Yeah, I mean, they've seen the worst, and that's a really positive. Now, they paid a price, and then the third the type of person we've seen, and this one troubles me, these don't become entrepreneurs. It's the person with the perfect resume, valedictorian, quarterback, or she was the captain of the tennis team, went to college and made straight A's. And that person will go on to look for prestige, but they can't afford to do what they really love and want to do to find a calling because they have to defend the mask. They have to defend the image. And they just can't. They've been taught that prestige matters more than anything. And so I think, as I've thought about entrepreneurship, I think of it more these days as a hero's journey, as going out and struggling and overcoming to find the Holy Grail. But in the end, it's not about the Grail; it's about how the hero changes. And I think it's a battle where the entrepreneurs, both internally and externally, are seeking competence and escaping prestige.
We talked about this before. this company, Emergent Order, is my first time starting and running.
I love the name
business.
too. Emergent Order is a great name.
It's whenever anybody asks me, so what does this mean? What's your philosophy? I see you have all these opinions. It's like Emergent Order. That's my philosophy.
That is a philosophy. It's a terrific philosophy.
But I, myself and Josh and Lisa, we started this, and I've thought of, as I've met people like you, and I think about like, I often like reflect, like, even what you've just described as some of these motivating forces. I don't exactly see myself in any of those three exactly, and it's weird, and I think in some respects I'm not the same type as a lot of the truly successful entrepreneurs I know.
So what do you think drives you?
I have always been a project person, an artist.
Okay.
And so one of my favorite people in the whole world was my grandfather, my mom's dad. And he was entrepreneurial, but not necessarily an entrepreneur. So he was like an artist and an architect and yet not trained in either. And he had this diverse set of like businesses and life experiences. And he was the life of the party, and he was the fastest, funniest person you'd meet. And when he died, there was lines around the church in Philadelphia for hours of people he had met over the years. And the other person in my life that I looked up to is my dad. And my dad is a surgeon, but he's also from South Philly, and he raised me doing projects. And so I learned how to like lay tile when I was like 9 years old. And so since I was little, as long as I could remember, I wanted to either be a builder or an architect or a designer and then ultimately my interest in drawing and art took over. So I was always coming up with projects in my head, something I wanted to do or make.
Right.
And they weren't necessarily business ideas. They weren't business ideas, really. They would sometimes be inventions when I was little, even if they were ridiculous things. But
see, I think that is at least a different subset of an entrepreneur for me. And whether it's an artist or an inventor, it's seeking beauty and to create for the sake of creation. And the question or the place where that can veer off course at times, and you're still a creator, and I would put Elon Musk in this category, would be I'll invent and I'm not worried at the end about the invention being worth more than the sum of the parts, today at least. So I'm going to be an artist, because to me a true artist creates beautiful art, and they don't really care if it sells or not. And if it sells 100 years after their death, I mean, that's fine. A promotional artist, nothing wrong with this, but is a great salesperson, and they'll sell junk for a lot of money as art and make it work. So I just don't think there are many true artists in the world and many true inventors who invent for the beauty of it and actually get something done. So that I think that could very well be a subset, but it's a rarer one that I found. When I said kind of overcoming a father, that's that desire for freedom. That's that Atlas Shrugged push. And, I want to be free. Well, you have to want to be free from something.
Right.
And it's usually that father figure you want to free yourself from. But the search for beauty, I think, is a rarer type.
The thing that I think unlocked, so I worked for years in Viacom, and I was still kind of entrepreneurial inside of Viacom, coming up with projects and pitching different initiatives and things like that. But the thing that unlocked the possibility of me even trying to start my own company with with Josh and Lisa was actually when Matteo was born. And I think maybe this speaks to this prestige part, or this going away. I went to film school. I wanted to be a director. I just wanted to make movies, and that's all. And like every year that went by that I didn't feel like I was getting closer to making movies, I was like incurring this sort of psychic debt of why am I not? Oh, and my buddy just got a multi-picture deal at Paramount, and why am I not doing that? Even as I was climbing up inside of Viacom. And when Matteo was born, it reshuffled how I thought about my priorities in such a fundamental way that my own judgment or my own desire to be successful, like, kind of went away. And actually, for the first 6 months of it, I was very disoriented about what I cared about.
Right, you're redefining what success meant.
And when I came out of it, I found that, and I still feel this way to this day. In some ways, I feel like it more than ever. That I could live in a mobile home with my family and be perfectly happy. And so it kind of unlocked the ability for me to like go after something where I could fail,
right, in
a way that like I couldn't before. And I think I've sort of been slowly discovering that entrepreneurial love. I've always been the other thing my dad would always say is I've always been a salesman since I was little. He's like, you could sell me my own socks. So
well, and I think that type though, that's getting closer to the Navy SEAL. It's not just because I've seen the worst of life. Life's going to be fine. And again, I think my current definition would be more about being a calling, finding your gifts, sharing them with the world, using them to overcome challenges. I think that's a more positive view of entrepreneurship. That's not what I see that drives most people to start a business, though. To me, that's a healthier view and the one I wish I'd had earlier. But most of the people I have that really want to do something successful, making money, it requires sacrifices that often don't come from something that pure.
So you're studying, you're teaching these ideas. How do you go about teaching some of this stuff?
Yeah,
like when you got into this, how did you?
Well, I almost jumped in because the Socratic method at Harvard, the one we use at the Acton School of Business and the one we use at Acton Academy, is you never make a declarative sentence. You never say something or lecture. You can only ask questions. So I didn't start teaching to tell someone something. I started teaching to find out something out of curiosity about myself, about the world, and I'm still that way. So it's a form of inquiry, of believing that when you walk in a room with 30 people, you're not telling them anything. You're there to learn from the group. And I still feel that way, and it's a wonderful way to learn. And it's why we attract so many great entrepreneurs to the Acton to teach. It's because you're not teaching, you're learning. And
the Harvard MBA had this Socratic method?
It's the founder of the Socratic method, and really all the other Socratic schools in one way or another were born from people leaving Harvard to go be more pure. There's only a handful of really Socratic schools, but that method, that case method, got its start at Harvard and was borrowed really from the world of medicine and law and adapted to become what we think of today as the Socratic method.
How long were you at UT?
We were at UT for about 10 years. We had built a successful program and begun to ask a lot of questions about if 7 of us could teach most of the people, what was everyone else doing there? And really innocently asking, trying to figure it out. And the fact we'd won all the teaching awards and were asking those questions, I'd say we got along very well with all the teachers, tenure or not tenure, no matter whether we had a wonderful following. But there were people that didn't really like us being around. And so it's a long story, not worth going into, but we basically either quit or were fired en masse, depending on which story you would like. I'd like to think that we were fired. They like to think we quit. We had no choice. We left, and that started the Acton School of Business. We said, as a group, gosh, we've just stranded about half the people at the MBA because they came for our program, but they couldn't take it to the second year. So we had 500 or 600 people sign up thinking they were coming. And we said, just as a moral obligation, let's teach one class off campus, and we'll do it for free. You have to buy your cases. It's $100. We'll give you the $100 back if you finish. Probably nobody will show up, but at least we've kind of done our bit. So a group of us agreed to do that. 130 people showed up.
And
it was
where?
40 hours a week. We were doing it at St. Ed's, a little college just right down the street from where we are right now in South Austin. Well, people drove from College Station, from Houston, from Waco. Faculty came from other schools. We had this grand following we didn't know we had. And so we taught the class. It was a blast. And then we had this epiphany and said, we've always said the first year of the MBA was pretty worthless. we have the second year, let's just have an MBA. And that was the birth of the Acton MBA. Now, we didn't know later that you can't just have an unaccredited MBA. You and I were talking about regulations before the broadcast started. And it turns out it's illegal to teach an unaccredited MBA in the state of Texas.
It's illegal?
It's illegal. You will go to jail.
For teaching it or for giving somebody the diploma?
Oh, no, yeah, you can't say the words. So
I come to your... you rent an office space. I come there. You teach me things about life, and that's illegal.
And I say, John, this is not accredited. I'm not going to give you a degree. It's called an MBA. I'm going to give you a piece of paper, but it's not. We're in no way accredited, which is what we said.
That's illegal.
You will go to jail for that. Now, I didn't know that.
I'm trying not to have my blood boil hearing that.
We had a whole room full of people that were going to pay us $30,000 a year to execute this. We said we weren't accredited. And you might imagine that somebody might have turned us into the authorities if you were thought in terms of conspiracies. But however the authorities found out, they called me. And I thought, we're done. So I got on the small little plane I flew, and I flew back up to Abilene to the campus where my great-grandfather was buried, a little small Baptist school up there. And I went in to see the president, and wonderful guy named Craig Turner, and I never met him. And Craig stuck his hand out and said, gosh, I've heard so many great things about Acton. Our very first year, we had won the best MBA program in the country from Princeton Reviews. So we had all this press. And he said, I'm just glad you're here. And I said, well, Craig, this is your lucky day. And I laughed and I said, I know there's no way you could give us an accreditation. I mean, it'd take a year and you have to get the faculty together and it's going to have, and he stuck out his hand and he said, you got a deal. And I said, well, when can you do it? And he said, by 1 o'clock today, I'll call a faculty meeting. And I said, well, how much do we have to pay? And he said, whatever you want. And so I went home that day because the state had told us to take down our website and we were done. And I told Laura, I said, I think it was a God thing. And her response I love was, what exactly do you think isn't a God thing? Which I laughed. And one of my best friends took us to an office building he had and said, I can have this demoed in 6 weeks. I can have a classroom built for you. And the Acton MBA was in business.
We don't need to go into details about perhaps just because the scars will resurface, but you didn't just leave. You really went up against an entrenched political machine within the school system.
That happened, but then later on with Governor Perry, I got really involved in higher ed reform, which has to be the greatest of all the many mistakes I've made. Had to be high on the mistake list, and that turned out to be I learned I'm not very good at politics. Let's just put it that way.
Was this after? This was after you had left?
Yeah, that was Governor Perry and I started working on higher ed reform in 1998 when he was lieutenant governor, and continued to work on it. Up until very recently, and so that was a 15-year project that we were really working on. How do you bring better teaching to universities? How do you lower the cost? How do you increase the quality? Turned out to, as you're alluding to, be a big public fight with the University of Texas, which I wasn't trying to pick a fight with. This was about all the universities in the state, exposed major corruption at the university in terms of handing out admissions to politicians' kids and rich donors. The president was fired over it. And that corruption's still going on today. Didn't do one bit of good. All the corruption's still there. The extra costs are there. I'm an alumnus of the University of Texas. I love the place. It's it's an institution. It's not a person to me, but it's like many universities. It's not the only one. That world's going to change eventually. But anyway, that was fighting against windmills because we had no idea the power we were up against.
And this was after you had set up Acton MBA, got accredited.
Long after that. Yeah. This was the only way those two were connected is that I was, I knew a lot about teaching, and had won a lot of teaching awards even later. And so it was really hard to say that I didn't know anything about education. Most business people get involved, and you say, well, how would you know? It's like, well, because
I've been doing this a long time.
I've been doing it a long time, and I got a lot of awards. So not that I was, but I had credentials that the average outsider didn't have. And but it's and education, both K-12 and university education, is a messy thing. I mean, you and I were talking before the broadcast started that people now expect schools to do things that families used to do and that churches used to do and that institutions can't do. And we built the university in the 40s and 50s to be this mega university that would bring back the GIs from World War II and cure cancer. And we just put too many demands on an institution and gave it a lot of money. I mean, both K-12 and it's an institution. So it's not again a unicorn that you can make do anything you want.
What is the point of education? So an economist friend I really like is a guy named Bryan Caplan.
Yep.
And he's written this book called The Case Against Education, which I haven't actually gotten to read yet, but I've heard him give like lectures and interviews about the book. And he makes a lot of cases about, he makes kind of an empirical data argument that essentially the only real value you get out of college is
sorting, picking the smart people from the non-smart people and not much value added.
Yeah, like for example, there was this, for those that are not familiar with this argument, there's a theory that says, well, the purpose of a college education is human capital, like you're investing in yourself, in your knowledge and your skills. And yet what Bryan lays out is that the benefits of the diploma require the piece of paper, that if you've gone to 3 3/4 year of a college degree, but you somehow drop out at the end and don't get the diploma, you do not get the financial benefits or the income increases or that if you just spent that last extra couple months where you're not learning anything, which suggests at least that.
I think that, by the way, that's true. And he was doing a study, and it's an empirical study, but of college degrees in general. I had a good friend recently that's a Stanford graduate that his whole goal is just to get his kids in Stanford so they can immediately drop out. Because for elite schools, it's just acceptance. So for a non-elite school, I want to show for 4 years I can actually work hard.
Right.
And that I'm reasonably smart. For the elite schools, the credential's just I got in.
So once you got in, now it's like, oh, I didn't even need it.
He was very clear, and he wasn't kidding. For his 2 children, the value of being at Stanford for 4 years was a net negative, a serious net negative, a waste of their time to be at Stanford for 4 years. So that this is the credentialism argument and the sorting argument for education.
One of the funniest examples that Bryan gives is, he says, and Bryan's an active college professor at George Mason University. He says, so when your students show up to class and for some reason you're not there because of a prior engagement or a sickness or something like that, and so they don't have to take the class, a class that they are paying thousands of dollars for that class, they're not upset that they got gypped. They're happy. They're excited. And that in and of itself, like, woohoo, I didn't need to go to class. It's like you're paying thousands of dollars and you're happy not to use it. Like that is another thing with these sort of interesting
I'll tell you one of our major state universities, and not the one located here in Austin. There is a whole industry across the street from the university where you pay twice. You pay again to go be taught by adjuncts what you just paid for, and you go take the test over on the university campus. But the teaching is so bad that you actually pay adjuncts to teach you across the street. The University of Phoenix has gotten Arizona State has gotten very good at high quality online. 80% of their students now, the freshmen, sophomores, will not walk across the street to go to a campus lecture. They would rather take the courses online. So it's same what Caplan's saying. It's the teaching is a net negative. The distinction I'd make, John, is I don't think about education at all. I think about learning. So how can you convince someone to go out and want to learn? And if you need an expert to learn something, that's terrific, but it's learner driven, not an institution educating you. And I think when you flip it and you think about it being all about the learner, and there's a great old quote, I taught him, but he didn't learn anything. what in the world can that sentence mean?
Right.
How could you teach someone they learn? So I like to flip it and think about, how do I get someone engaged enough to want to learn and ask them questions? Once you do that in this world, you can learn anything.
I really feel for educators because, and you know, you've worked so hard to try to bring a sense of measurement to performance, right?
Right.
And how do you do that? How do you measure if someone has learned? How do you confirm that they've learned in a way that can somehow be replicatable so that you can judge it? Like when I was looking at some of your, you had these sort of 7 solutions.
Right.
And
well, you are going back to the old higher ed stuff. I'm impressed.
And, you know, so you said this, like the first solution was, measure teaching efficiency and effectiveness. And there's this dichotomy that's really weird because it where activists, especially in K through 12, will simultaneously say, we need to give teachers more room to do what they do, and we can't be expected to measure whether they're good or not.
Right.
I've heard that I've heard those two things come out of the same folks. It tends to be activists who don't like, say, school choice. They say, well, I don't like vouchers because you're just gonna deplete the public schools of resources. What we really need is we just need our current schools to have better resources and for the teachers to be able to do what they do well. And when I ask, well, how are you going to measure if they're doing it well? They say, well, you can't do that. How do we do that? So it's like, I don't even, how do you think about that, since this was obviously something you put a lot of thought into? Well,
it changes a bit whether you're on the higher ed side or the K-12 side. So we're on the higher ed side now.
Yeah.
And it's funny because the 7 solutions that caused all this uproar, anybody in business that looked at them, or running any kind of institution, it's not money making. If you ran a not-for-profit and looked at them, you'd say, well, of course you're going to measure effectiveness. Of course you're going to pay people for performance. Of course you're going to, it was all things that were so common sense. Yeah. I was stunned.
Let me read them. So your 7 solutions and just so I understand, what was the solution to?
The governor asked me, he said, look, you guys have been incredibly successful at the higher ed level of people. They love you. They've learned a lot. If you were going to kind of go change universities, what would you change? And I said, we want much better research, higher quality, and we want better teaching. Because what else are you going to do at a university but do research and teach?
So your 7 solutions towards that end were: 1 was measure teaching efficiency and effectiveness with the goal of improving the quality of teaching. 2 was publicly recognize and reward extraordinary teachers. How dare you? 3 was split research and teaching budgets to encourage excellence in both. What's that about? What was that?
Well, later on, when we finally got the data, and because I'd been on the inside at UT, I knew the data, and I'd asked enough at other universities. And by the way, this isn't just UT, right? This is everybody.
Yeah. I went to Penn State University.
Yeah, and I can promise you, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, all the same. So this is not about. I just happen to have the data at UT. So we actually got the data for how many classes people taught, what their students thought about them, and what they were paid. And I'm remembering this now from years back, but this is going to be pretty close. So the university had roughly 4,000 people teaching something. The adjuncts, the people like me that were doing most of the teaching, were doing 60% of the teaching, were paid it was something like 14% of the budget. So if that was okay, if that wasn't okay, you shouldn't be
60% of the teaching is getting 14% of the financing.
So if that's not okay, then you shouldn't be doing it. If it's okay and you just hire 40% more people, you can run the whole school for about 28 cents on the dollar. And this is an institution that's spending a couple of $1 billion a year. So I said, okay, so then you look at the top researchers, and we were always pegged for being anti-research. Not true at all. Love research. The top 10% of the faculty, 400 of the 4,000, brought in hundreds of millions of dollars of funded research, scientific research, cancer, engineering.
So they were, in a sense, an income generator for the school. Oh my gosh.
I mean, incredibly profitable if you want to think about it that way.
My Lisa's cousin, Paula, is an enormously successful disease researcher. And she's brought in hundreds of millions.
These are real scientists.
Yeah, doing huge stuff for the
now,
CDC.
Here's what's interesting. That group actually teaches a lot, too, which is surprising. You think they'd be too busy, but they actually teach a lot and bring in a lot of money. So then you start to ask this question, what's everyone else do? So that's why you want to measure them differently, right? It turns out, again, I'm remembering this from memory, but that 800 of the faculty at the University of Texas taught 0 or 1 student a year and brought in no outside research income. Now, this is what started the explosion, because this is before we found out about all the admissions.
So when you say measure teacher efficiency and of effectiveness, you're working with a fairly crude level of measurement. Like, do you teach any students at all?
So once we got the data, we were just stunned. That number, by the way, that was $500 million a year was being paid to these 800 people. And that's more than the university took in tuition.
Well, what were they? Were they like writing books and papers or doing publishing or something?
We don't know. To this day, I don't know. That was the question. It's like, they may be doing something incredibly valuable. I'm open to that. Let's ask. And that's when everything blew up. So, to this day, I don't know. Now, having been on the inside, a lot of committee meetings, a lot of, there's just, when you don't measure things and you don't run something efficiently, there's just lots of little bits of slop. And a lot of where I think the political correctness comes from is just people with too much time on their hands. And so I don't know what those 800 people were doing, but they weren't bringing in outside funding. And you could say, well, they were writing their own stuff. Well, yeah, but
they were doing research on microaggressions in safe spaces.
Yeah, on what? And we could even argue that research on microaggression is terrific. I mean, I'm not taking that stand. I mean, my political views aside, but we need to know what it is, right? There's a lot of it going on. And so we don't know. And so that's what solution 4.
So then solution 4 was require evidence of teaching skills for tenure. So that sounds tough.
This is well documented that at a major research university, teaching well for most places is actually a net negative. You'll be knocked down for that. So the question is, how many research papers have you written? Not of the scientific kind, usually, only in some disciplines, usually to get published in a journal no one reads. So this is a $50 to $75 billion a year business in America, writing research articles about things no one reads, that a handful of people will read. That's how the professoriate get rewarded and get promoted and get tenure. And so we were just saying, you can keep doing that. I mean, that's the faculty runs the school. But why don't we also see if the people can teach? If you're going to have them teaching, let's have some measurement of the effectiveness of teaching, and let's reward that.
So number 5 was use results-based contracts with students to measure quality.
Well, and this is what's important. You ask about how to measure things. And most of the things that are interesting you can't measure. I mean, that's what at the K-12 level the state tests try to do, and it's just memorization, and you forget it. It doesn't matter much.
Yeah, we've got Google now.
Yeah, our system at the Acton MBA was pretty simple. We made very clear promises about what you would learn and be able to do, and then we asked students at the end, did we deliver? And we graded on a forced curve, so we couldn't give all A's to get good ratings. And we said, if nothing else, the university, let's just make very clear promises in writing, and let's ask them if we did what we said. And you can only give 20% A's, 30% B's, so many C's, so you're going to grade on a forced curve. And because now it's up to where 91% of the kids at Harvard University get an A.
This is a diversion from the numbers list, although it is relevant to this measurement. What does that? I want to understand this idea of a forced curve, because I've heard everybody hears like it's graded on a curve. Right. So what does that mean? Like, walk me through what that means.
Well, it just says so. We've got in our mind, and normally A, B, C, D, F. F's a failure, D's terrible. I want some distinction of quality. And so we'll call them 1 through 5. Let's take away, we're not trying to shame people that are at the bottom. The important thing is everybody's got a hierarchy of what you're good at. So let's find out if John's great at sales and Jeff's great at operations. Let's make that transparent. I can improve my relative standing some in sales, but I've probably got a gift. And if my gift's plumbing and your gift is drywall or medicine or whatever, so let's actually measure where people are on a curve to give them some distinction of what they do well and where their gifts are to get better at that. And so that's the idea of a forced curve, is not to shame people at the bottom, is to highlight people at the top. So I think what makes America great is there's thousands of pecking orders, and if you're the best plumber in Austin, you're doing better than probably the average Harvard graduate in Austin. If you're a world-class plumber, you're doing great. And the trick
especially
is
right now, big time.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the idea of a forced curve, is show me what I'm really good at.
Because there's a part of that when I hear it, it sounds like a kind of artificial zero-sum game. Like, well, wait a second, if there's actually happens to be like several people who are, you know, or if the distribution of excellence is not against that curve. If like you have 10 students,
it's only zero sum if you have one pecking order.
Okay, so you're saying it distributes across a lot of different. So
I learned this at Harvard Business School because Harvard grades on the forced curve, and so the top 10% are excellent, the bottom 30% are low pass, and everybody else is in the middle. And so you're scared to death. I mean, I knew I was the admissions mistake when I went, so I knew I was going to get all low. You have to get 4 low passes and you get kicked out. Well, nobody ever gets kicked out because everyone's good at something of the 8 classes and everyone's somewhat deficient in something. And you work really hard because you don't want to be at the bottom of anything. You have this realization you actually aren't as good as some people at some things. And you know what?
So it's not like it's not really a concept that's as applicable for like an overall grade. It's really this sense of almost like trying to surface your comparative advantage.
Right. See, we could have a whole argument on the rank and yank that Enron used and General Electric used, that we're going to fire the bottom 10% of employees. We can have a whole argument whether that makes sense or not. But that's different than having 8 or 10, or in America, 5,000 different pecking orders and finding out which one you're really good at. And when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about find out which pecking order, force rank those, because you know what? The market does that. The market force ranks by how many customers want to come see us. And the great thing about finding your calling is you attract great opportunities. You're going to have, people don't go to you to make poor films, right? They go to you to make beautiful films. And that's what you want. I hope so. You want people that want to come to you for the hard ones, not the easy ones. And so that's what being at the top of the pecking order, it gets you working with other people at the top. They get the hard opportunities. I strongly recommend you find some intersection where there's almost no one competing, like trying to be a free market filmmaker. That was my entrepreneurial scam. Like, I've got an idea. I'm going to do something nobody else wants to do. Listen, I went into energy at Harvard because everybody else wanted to be in high tech. And I'm like, all the really smart people are in high tech. I believe I'll go somewhere else where I can compete with my friends who aren't as smart as the high tech guys. I think it's brilliant.
I was always a nerd. I still have the scars of high school nerddom. And so I've literally never had the confidence to go up to the prettiest girl. So man, did I luck out with Lisa. Because wow, I still don't understand how that happened. But it applies to me in every way. It's like, so I'm always like, no, everybody's going after that. Well, why would I want to do that? I'm going to go after this other interesting thing that I like that isn't.
I'm not going to comment about Laura because I don't want her to know how lucky I am. I don't want her to wake up.
Okay, so then let's see. We've got number 6. Go ahead.
I think this is important, though, and the reason it's important is there is an attack on competence in the world right now, and on America. That there's something unfair about being competent at something, and there's plenty of unfairness in the world. Don't get me wrong. There's lots of unfairness, and it's real, but it's not unfair necessarily by definition to be at the top of a pecking order. And I think that's an important thing, that this idea that it's good to be good at something because you can help other people is an important concept.
Yeah, it's this we're going to get, I want to talk a lot more about this too, this challenge of this egalitarianism that doesn't survive grade school kids sniff test.
Well,
right, the everyone gets a trophy. But I want to get through the last of the 7 lists, and then I want to talk about middle school. So the last two you had here were put state funding directly in the hands of students.
That means don't give the scholarships to the school, give the scholarship to students and let the students vote with their feet.
Like the GI Bill.
Right. Incredibly controversial, by the way.
Everyone loves the GI Bill, except we should never replicate it anywhere else.
No, because we'd like it all to come to the president's office, and we'll decide where it should go.
I know. Whenever I hear people's hate on like the idea of school vouchers, it's like, so you hated the GI Bill then? Yeah. No, the GI Bill was great. It's like, well, that's all the school vouchers is. It's like the GI Bill. The GIs come home, you give them a thing, they go to whatever school they want. I don't get it. Number 7, create results-based accrediting alternatives. And we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah, and that's just, I mean, the accreditors, and to be fair, they really are doing kind of the best they can, but you can't achieve excellence through rules. I mean, rules just, the more rules you have doesn't necessarily make for excellence. It does make for due process. I mean, you can follow processes, and occasionally process will lead to improvements. But there is the accreditors today are divided into geographical monopolies at the university level. And so there's no competition among accreditors. And what that does is, even if the accreditors are doing a good job, if you're inside a university and you don't want any change, you say, oh, that's a great idea, John, but our accreditor won't let us. You don't even call the accreditor, right? You just blame, because they're this black box that might someday come shut you down. And so it becomes kind of an excuse not to innovate.
What is an accreditor? What is this? When somebody says the school is accredited, or when you started Acton and the state was like, we're going to throw you in jail because you're not accredited.
Okay, so this is an area where I do know a lot about university accreditation. I've read the state statutes, but I'm a long way from an expert. So there's two different things. The state certifies like a license. You can braid hair. So the state, or you can, do something. You can be a barber.
You can be a plumber.
Right. So the certification of the state is like that, and that's what the state does. The accreditors came about after the GI Bill because the government's handing out lots of money, and there are diploma mills. Now, by the way, there's plenty of diploma mills today that are not-for-profit universities. So you can be a poor university, for-profit, not-for-profit, but there were abuses. And so the government said somebody has to say who's good and who's bad. They've got this private group of accrediting groups. We're going to let you hand out the money. Well, you and I might say initially, that's great, it's not the government. The problem is, if you give that group a monopoly, now it's everyone on every church committee, homeowners association board, or country club board you've ever known that wants to have dictatorial powers, and they're in a private entity, and there's nothing you can do. I mean, there's no oversight. And so in America today, at the higher ed level, the federal government has by law given a geographic monopoly to a group of basically they're paid, but they're paid by the universities.
Which is right away a weird.
Right. I mean, you're paid, and they're staffed largely by volunteers. Again, most of them trying to do a good job, but there's all these conflicts of interest, and you have a monopoly. And that's how higher education is accredited. Now, K-12 accreditation, anyone can start a K-12 accreditor. There's hundreds of them. That's a totally different, and it's state by state. It's a totally different animal. But the higher ed is a geographic monopoly controlled, funded by the federal government.
It reminds me a lot of, there's a new book out about the history of American medical care and the role of the American Medical Association. So you have the AMA charged, even though it's a private, nonprofit, for-profit, who cares? It's a tax designation. Right, but it's a private organization.
Yeah, the NFL's not for profit. So
the nonprofit, for-profit thing is the biggest social signaling scam of all time.
Absolutely.
But, it's like, okay, so one business accepts customers, the other business accepts customers and donors. Yeah. Therefore, it's a nonprofit. It's like, right. But they were the AMA was charged with licensing for doctors. So now you had this, and then they had all these weird things that they believed were important to protect doctors from, including doctors having their own mixed practices that sold their own kind of group doctor practice insurance, like these prepaid things. And so the AMA was this really weird monopoly.
Yeah.
And you can say it's not government, except that it is government. If you have a monopoly of governance, you are government at that point.
Yeah.
Whether you like government or not, I think is even kind of irrelevant. If you don't have anyone else you can go to.
So all philosophical arguments aside, which are valid, it is clearly an excuse not to innovate, and it's not good for higher education. It's why we have way too much college debt. Graduation rates are incredibly low. Salaries coming out are low. I mean, everyone knows now that it's a disaster. We were saying it's going to be a disaster in 1998. I mean, we were way too early. The 7 solutions were way too early because you could see the train wreck coming, but the train wreck hadn't gotten here yet. And the train wreck's here now. I mean, we've got $1.8 trillion in college debt that these poor kids can't get rid of. You can't get rid of it in bankruptcy. And so, it's hurting the mortgage industries. And then there's people that want to forgive all that and make college free. What an incredible disaster to take, you say, oh, well, free college, how could that be bad? Well, because college doesn't work right now. And you just have more people being paid a lot of money to make something not work. It's insane.
Yeah, it's such a strange, again, like people hold these ideas in their head at the same time, I think just conveniently, that incentives matter or they don't matter at all. So they obviously matter because we should tax bad things like smoking or trans fats or large bottles of Coke, because if we tax it, people will use less of it. But if we make it free, they won't use more of it, or they will use more of it in a good way. I think there's a lot of motivated reasoning in all of these problems at the end of the day.
If you wanted to say, I wouldn't necessarily be in favor. If you wanted to say we should give everyone $5,000 to learn more, and then you're going to have to define what that means, and that's where you get into trouble. But it's different to say I'm going to give every person some voucher or some scholarship to go learn. That's different than saying we're going to pay the universities to do whatever they want.
Right.
That's, unfortunately, when we talk about making college free, that's what people generally are talking about. They think you're going to give students all this freedom. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about wiping out the debt and giving colleges all the money. You don't give a system that's failing more money. That's a bad idea. And it is failing, and everyone knows it's failing.
That seems to be one of the most popular ratchet effects perhaps in government in general, but certainly in education conversation. It's always, we can solve this is a disaster, let's give it more money. It seems like that's almost always the answer.
Well, and here's the big mistake, I think. The big mistake is, this goes back to the work of your friend George Mason. The value must be in the credential. So and prestige is easy just to give away. So if we make all this prestige free, if everyone just had a Harvard degree, everyone would have a high-paying job, or everyone had a Stanford degree. Well, that's not true. I mean, prestige doesn't mean anything without competence.
It's one of my favorite movies of all time is the Incredibles, and there's this moment where the bad guy who is so if you've never seen the Incredibles, it's about a family of superheroes, and the one of the bad guys, I don't want to give it away, but he's not a superhero. He doesn't have genetic natural powers, but he comes up with technological ones to try to kind of take down these specials. And at one point, he says, I'm going to give all this away because when everyone's special, no one will be. Yeah. And that was like that was his evil plot. I'm going to make everyone special because then no one will be special. And it's, there is a certain truth in that, especially if the entire point, like you're saying, is the only reason why this certificate is valuable is because it's scarce. If you make it not scarce, you will kill its value. So you went from this enormously successful career as an entrepreneur and as an oil man and as a geologist and as a businessman, and then you enter this higher education complex and win these awards as a teacher in higher ed with like really obviously high performing students, MBA students. How do you end up starting an elementary school?
Well, and I better be really clear here. Laura started it, and so co-founder is my exalted title I got later for stepping up and leading the middle school discussions. But it was really Laura's baby. But it did come from a meeting where our two boys were kindergarten age. They had been in Montessori school. Our daughter was older, and she was at one of the best private schools in town. And our question was, when should we transition from Montessori to traditional school? Should we do it this year, next year, how soon? So I went to see the very best teacher at her very good school, a tall man, I won't say his name, but a delightful guy and clearly a great teacher. And I said, when should we transition the boys? And he said, just as soon as possible. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, once they've had all that freedom, they won't like being chained at a desk for 8 hours a day. And before I could even think, I said, well, I don't blame them. And he looked down for the longest time. And I thought I'd offended him. I was confused. And he looked up and he had tears in his eyes and he shook his head really softly. And he shook his head and said softly, I don't either. And so I went home that day and I told Laura, I said, we're done. I don't know what we're doing. We can start a school, we can homeschool, but I just met with the guy who everybody says is the best teacher in that whole school, and he told me not to put my sons in traditional school, and he was very clear about it. So I'm finished. So I can quit my job.
This was at a prestigious private school.
It's a terrific school. It's still a good traditional school, and so Laura started with 7 young people and 5 brave families, Acton Academy, and we started over with a blank sheet of paper and said, what should learning look like? And we had no idea, and it's still an experiment. But we started completely over at a time when, with technological changes and with the being able to find information on the internet, it was just with the Socratic method, we were borrowing from all these great places. It was just a wonderful time to start something new. And as you know, but I'll say fast forward, it's now 10 years later. I mean, that's been now 10 years. We have 150 Actons around the world. These one-room schoolhouses with technological innovation that go from elementary all the way through high school. The owners are all coming in town this week. 150. We'll start another 150 this year. And they're exploding.
That's incredible growth.
It's incredible
to double
growth.
The total number of schools.
Yeah. Well, and we have 12,000 applications to start a school.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that's limited by our ability to help people launch them, but it's the single best thing I've ever done or been a part of, and we have been completely blown away by what young people can do. They can do far more than we ever imagined, and the whole school is founded on the idea that every person who walks in the door is a genius, and our job is to help them find a calling that'll change the world. And it's back to this pecking order thing. Everybody's good at something.
I had asked, so when we first moved down to Austin, I quickly got connected to Max Borders. His wife, Carly, I think had been a
she
guide.
Helped us early. Yeah, she was an early guide.
And so I was aware of Acton pretty quickly because I'm super interested in education, and I have, we have a son, and Matteo has been through all these different pedagogies. When we came down, he was initially at the Waldorf school, and then a Montessori school, and now, for a lot of reasons, he's at Acton. This has been his first year. And one of the criticisms, and I think this is a criticism that a lot of private schools get, was, well, of course the Acton kids are amazing. They're just taking the best kids there are. They've got and you do have a very rigorous application process.
Yeah. And
I asked Matteo, is it, do you have to be smart to get into Acton, do you think? Like, is it, and he said, I don't think you have to be smart. I do think you have to want to be smart.
Yeah. Well,
Can you answer that criticism?
Yeah. Well, first off, the criticism is absolutely just. And we can set up a system where we can ask of our customers and make a contract with them, and be pretty tough about upholding that contract. What's interesting is, Matteo's comment's right on. When we first started the middle school, half the people who came were in the bottom 10% of the test scores. The other half were in the top 1%. Because if you're doing okay in the middle, why would you go anywhere else, right? It's hard to change schools. Right. The fascinating thing is 6 months later, you couldn't tell the difference. So, we had a young lady that made up 7 or 8 grade levels in math in 1 year. She'd been told she was terrible at math. And, frankly, she wasn't very good at math, and as far as just aptitude. But you can learn a lot of math if you want to pretty fast. And what we learned was it is all about wanting to and believing you're on the hero's journey. And that's why the whole idea of the school being the hero's journey and the genius who finds a calling matters. Once you decide that's true, you can learn almost anything.
So I want you to explain the mechanics of the school, but first, talk to me about this hero's journey. It's something that so for those that don't know, that it's this concept that was written about by Joseph Campbell, and it was about epic storytelling. The classic example of the hero's journey is Lord of the Rings. Yeah. But why is this such an important concept for you? Why is it something that is emblazoned on the school grounds?
Well, one, because it works, but second, I think it's I think as humanity we've decided it's our story. It's Lion King, it's Star Wars, it's Lord of the Rings. It's 80% of the movies that work are about the hero's journey. It's about the hero striving and overcoming and becoming. It's our story. So I think all Campbell did was recognize that it's a very universal human longing, and you're either going to be a hero or you're going to be a victim.
So how does a kind of story architecture for great movies end up being important to thinking about education?
Gosh, that's a great question of how. I don't remember why the hero's journey to us. I thought about the hero's journey at Acton in business school a lot. We thought about this arc. In very ways, it's a Christian arc too. There's a very much a theological, moving forward in time kind of feeling to it. And I don't remember. I'd have to go back and ask Laura. We knew that was what we wanted to found the school on. I don't remember what triggered it at that moment because I'd been doing it a long time. She'd been reading about it. But it was the most important thing we did. And we really redefined in many ways what people want when they learn. And I think this is one thing we got right very early, that there's 4 questions people will ask when you want to learn. The first one is, who am I? And that's, who am I? Where am I now? Where am I going? That's the hero's journey. The second question was, what skills do I need and which must I master? So I need to be pretty good at reading, writing, math, but I'm going to be world class at plumbing. So that's the second question. The third one is, who needs to affirm me and hold me accountable? We all think about that great teacher in grade school or middle school, but Mr. Coonrod for me wasn't a great algebra teacher. Heck, he was a coach, but he believed in me, right? And so you need someone to believe in you. It doesn't have to be an authority figure in a classroom. It can be, but you do need, so we needed to set up a system that would do that. And then the fourth question, how do I prove what I can do? I need badges, or I need something that's not a hollow credential. I need real work. And that's why we have apprenticeships are so important in Acton. I need to be able to go out and do real stuff and have a letter of reference. So those are the 4 questions we built the school around, and the hero's journey was the first one.
So you've got these 4 questions. So these are questions that you kind of say you're saying are part of.
That's what our customers want to answer.
Right. So it's like we're saying these are assumptions about what a student is ultimately going to want or should want out of their learning process, or what a parent wants for their kid.
Or what our young people want, our parents want. Yeah.
And then how does that start to then manifest? How does that start? What did those 4 sort of guiding customer principles lead to right away, and what worked and what didn't work? Like because I know it's been an evolving, and even in just the little over half a year that we've been at the school, we've watched in real time how
things change a lot.
How actively you guys and how you and Laura personally, we have this incredible luxury of being at your school with you, as opposed, so.
But it's interesting, around the world in 20-something countries now and 30-something states and Canadian provinces, we're seeing the same problems and the same opportunities. I think it's human nature. We're seeing them all over the world. It's all playing out the same. And I think we know about 15% of the model. So you ask how it started. It started with, hey, here's an idea. Why don't you read things you really like? And I get in so much trouble with classicists about this, and I'm a big believer in the classics. I'm a great books kind of guy. But we said, look, start out reading comic books. Doesn't matter. Harry Potter. Oh, Harry Potter's terrible. I like Harry Potter. But what you find is if you let people read whatever they want and they love to read, they'll eventually read better stuff. And so we have 10 and 11-year-olds reading War and Peace or reading, because they want to read and they love to read. So here's an idea. We love to read. We're going to tell great stories about civilization. It's not American history. It's why do some civilizations rise and others fall? It's why I care about the past. I want to know who I am, where I'm going. And math. Well, thankfully, Khan Academy and many of the game-based math programs have made it easy to learn at your own pace. So now I've got reading, writing, math. We've got reading, math, and civilization. Then there's writing. And we stumbled into something really interesting with writing because you think, well, I have to teach writing or I have to...
Yeah, grammar.
Well, it turns out, and I think this will make sense, if you try to teach grammar with a red pencil, people hate to write. Nobody likes to tell their paper's terrible, right?
I still think I have scars from grammar. From English. It was called English class.
Right. So yes, you should have good grammar, and I've probably made 8 grammatical mistakes during this broadcast. But you want to learn to love to write. So we start with learning to love to write, and then we stumble into if you have friends peer review your work, and give you a critique, you're under an obligation to write better the next time, to write a better draft. And so what we learned is young people will write a lot. In fact, Mateo in the middle school will write 100 pages of finished material this year. It's more than most people write in graduate school in a PhD program. Well, the reason he does that is he and his friends like to critique each other. If you write 100 pages a year and you want to be better, you get to be a really good writer, and the grammar stuff takes care of itself.
It's funny. I was a little weird because my 2 areas of interest, I guess they do overlap, but I liked studio arts. I liked being the creative making stuff. And then I loved math and physics and I loved the systems solutions things. And I really didn't like anything else. I didn't like social studies and history. It was boring. I didn't like English and and the things that came in that, like grammar and writing. It's boring and horrible. Anything that involved just memorization. I didn't like things like chemistry when it was memorization. It was boring. And so I even through college, I don't really feel like I progressed a lot as a writer. And I still have this baggage of being very hesitant to even call myself a writer. Yeah. But I will say, after school, just having to write the amount of emails inside of Viacom.
Right.
And try to communicate clearly.
Knowing if you didn't write them correctly inside of Viacom, it was going to hurt, right? I mean, you had to write better emails.
Oh, man, and I made some mistakes along the way there that really made me learn what the value of editing and reading your work before you hit send. Yeah. And so just the act of doing it a lot.
Oh, our young people turn out to be beautiful writers. We have not taught 1 minute of math, and you know this is true, 1 minute of writing in the entire school for 10 years. And every single person in Launchpad, our high school, is a beautiful writer. So
let's get to this core thing, because this is the thing that when I explain what Mateo's school is like, people, their eyes sometimes bug out of their head. So explain how the mechanic works of what is the student experience at Acton Academy?
Well, so in the morning, you're going to be working on core skills, and you're going to have a choice. You can do reading, writing, math, or civilization. You may want to do reading all day. I may want to break it up. Now, I've got a series of badges over time in each one I'm going to learn. So I've got a long-term, and I've got to learn from the beginning of elementary school where I might set my goals for an hour to by middle school. Mateo's setting his goals now by certainly the week and probably by 6-week increments. So you're learning to set goals and reach them, but you're in control of what you work on today. And you're going to work on these core skills, reading, writing, math, and civilization. In the afternoons, you're going to do project-based, narrative-based quests. So you may be Thomas Edison in his Menlo Park lab doing electricity experiments. So we're going to learn complex, team-based, problem-solving skills, the kind of network kind of skills you're talking about. We're going to learn those in these hands-on quests in the afternoon. And you're going to learn to run this whole community, this Tocquevillian society, with your classmates. And, you know this, we'll go a day and no adult will even go in the middle school. They run the entire place. I was guiding in the elementary studio where I'm not really capable for 3 days not long ago, and not one young person spoke to me. They did everything. So there was effectively no adult there. I mean, I just wanted to be down there for safety reasons. We always have an adult in the elementary studio. Didn't need me. I was totally superfluous. The older elementary students led the lessons. And again, they're asking Socratic questions. They're not teaching. Got the quest ready, administered, governed the school. No adult.
So just to be clear, the students, the guides, the adults in the room have a rule, right? And what is that rule?
There are not many big rules in acting. One of them is a guide, an adult, may never, ever answer a question for any reason whatsoever. And because we don't want to be authority figures. It's great for young people to have authority figures, father and mother authority figures. They're authority figures in the world, but we don't want to serve as that. We want them to learn to become their own authority figures in the studios.
So one other criticism I had read early on, which for me sounded great, but for a lot of people I imagine could sound like a genuine criticism, was Acton Academy is, and I'm going to quote this, and then you can be, is homeschooling for rich people. Now, and here's, first of all, your tuition is $95, at least here in Austin, was I think $9,500 a year, under $10,000 a year, right. Which for a private school with the kind of experience I feel Mateo is having is unbelievably affordable.
Well, it's a fourth what we paid for our daughter to go to the most expensive private school in town. So I mean, that.
In northern New Jersey, the kindergartens were $35,000 a year. The only affordable non-public option was the Catholic school, and they're subsidized by the diocese. And you're competitive with Catholic school prices.
Well, our actually cost to run the school, you won't like this as a parent, our cost is now below $4,000 a year.
You're exploiting me.
I'm exploiting you. Of course, it's a not-for-profit, so we put all that money back into other schools and help people. But the reason, frankly, we don't charge, Laura keeps saying, why don't we charge $4,500? I said, because the competition's, $20,000 to $40,000 a year, and it just, how are you going to decide who gets to come? So you price it at that. Let's build more and more Actons. I think we have 7 in Austin now. Or we'll soon have, by September, we'll have 7. So the idea is let's build more, and then the competition will bring the price down.
So you come in, so this criticism, and it's like homeschooling, I think it arrives from this notion that, like you said, the kids are there. You've built this set of rules and frameworks for them to effectively, in a real sense, teach themselves.
Right.
So why come? What are they getting? Why is it a benefit to even come if the kids are teaching themselves?
Well,
I mean, obviously, I'm doing it.
It's a great question, because what more do we want for our sons and daughters than to be independent human beings who can go out in the world and accomplish something in groups of people they want to associate with that's amazing in the world without the help of an outside authority? I mean, in other words, this is life. It's life to be able to go out in the world and move amongst people, older and younger. And you know as well, it's on our studios, we've got elementary and high school age and middle schoolers mixing all the time, helping each other. It is like a big family in a way. But what a wonderful thing to recreate what we all loved as children in our neighborhoods, to be able to be with other young people who are amazing, doing things without an adult. In fact, I'll tell you, if you ever want to give a speech to young people, this is my secret weapon, all you have to start out with is ask the question, who's tired of being bullied or pushed around by somebody older? And every hand will go up. And by a parent, a coach, an older brother, we forget young people get pushed around all the time. So to be in a place where they're free to make mistakes, learn to fail early, cheaply, and often, where sometimes it's tyrannical and other times it's Lord of the Flies, but you got to work it out. That's life. So they're learning how to live life, and it's hard, and it's not smooth, and it's not, but boy, when the young people come out of it, and the ones that make it, they are amazing. And our 2 sons are now 16 and 17. And I tell you, whatever else happens, it's worth it 100 times over that in 2 more years, they're on their own doing what they can do in the world. If I walk out here and get hit by a car right now, they're going to be fine. And as a parent, and that would have been true at 13 and 14, there's no better feeling in the world that I'm glad they still want me around. In fact, I'm delighted to be around them. I can't wait to go home and see them because they're so much fun. But they don't need me anymore. That's my job. My job is not to be their best friend. It's not to protect them. It's not to. And my job is to work myself out of a job so they can go lead an amazing life.
I have an extra affliction as a parent in that I am 100% Italian and was raised by South Philly Italian parents. And so I want to be that to be my job, but I also want my little baby boy to never leave.
I know. No. Oh, it breaks my heart to think that they're going to be gone. I don't know what we're going to do. No, It breaks my heart because I love them so much. And but what's more creepy than the parent that won't leave, right? I was like, no. But no, I mean, it's part of the hero's journey as a parent that you've got. I mean, how terrible is it going to be the day they walk away, and they'll come back for Christmas and things, but they're not supposed to come back forever. I mean, they're supposed to go do their own thing.
Oh, I talk to my parents probably at least 4 times a week.
Yeah.
And I never thought I'd actually leave the Northeast when we moved down here to Austin. And my mom will always blame this on my wife because she's not the blood relative. So of course she's always going to be at fault. No one's good enough for an Italian mother's son. That's just but it's hard. I know the heartbreak she has for the fact that we're not a drive away, and it was the one thing about the move. Every other aspect of it, especially having lived up in the Northeast and suffering the taxes, the cost of living, the commute time, which was 4 hours a day, which I hate and love because I taught myself economics on the bus. But it's so difficult to leave your parents behind, and it's so difficult as a parent to let go. And we've talked about offline that this challenge that you guys face at Acton of with parents, of having them be able to let go, be able to not helicopter their kids' educational problems, and to talk about that challenge at the level of the parents.
Sure, and I want to be clear. We all want deep and long relationships with our children as competent adults in loving relationships as parents and children. And I mean, I hope I get to talk to my boys 4 times a day. But I'll say this: if they don't want me calling them, I won't call them. Right? I mean, I want them calling me. What I think we see is parents trying to live out their lives through their children is very damaging. Parents trying to, out of some fear, or trying to I think I see it lots of times, trying to remedy something that happened to them is not healthy. We see it all the time. And a parent will come in and say, well, I hear Johnny was bullied. He got pushed down. And it's like, well, yeah, but he pushed somebody else down. Bullying really doesn't happen. And, at Acton, we see it every day. Everybody's around. You would know. And then if you listen long enough, then the parent will finally say, well, when I was a child and I was bullied. And Laura and I see us doing the same thing. We see us, when we get mad about something, if you pause and step away from it, it's all about your shadow and something that happened to you. And so we've just gotten to where many parents are so overprotective, or they see themselves, if my child fails, I'm failed as a parent. And I've seen parents do everything right and have very difficult children. We've been lucky. We've had easy children. I think that's because we haven't screwed them up, and we got lucky. So this idea of I'm going to define my failure or success as a parent based on whether my children succeed, I want them to succeed, but I'm not defining myself by that. That's not fair. I'm obsessed with this book by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. I think I'm screwing up his name, but so be it. The Coddling of the American Mind. Right.
And the thesis is in 2013, 2014, they both started to notice. They're both, Jonathan's a professor at NYU, and Greg works at this organization, FIRE, that advocates for free speech on college campuses. That college students were starting to go from being the lead advocates of free speech on college campuses to demanding protection from controversial speech and from speech that sort of challenges their own beliefs. And the protection was being asked for, trigger warnings being an example, or safe spaces, in the name of safety. You need to keep us safe. This needs to be a safe environment. And the book's basic thesis, so they wrote this article that was published in The Atlantic and became like one of their most widely read articles in the history of the magazine. And then the book that followed from that just got released this past year, basically lays out a theory that has haunted me as a parent, which is that at some point, it seems to be marked by the Generation Z, the generation that was sort of born in the 90s. This generation of kids has not had free play or sort of parentless, authorityless life. That every second of their day, there is the authority figure of the parent there, and that they've been in this state of constant protection from everything, straight through to college. And that's as contrasted with like my upbringing, which is like living outside of Philly, and you'd get home from third grade and you'd immediately go outside, and your parents had no idea really where you were until you came home for dinner, and you're running all around the neighborhood, and you're getting into like fights, and you're trying to come up with games to play and trying to figure out the rules, and getting in arguments about the rules, and, you know, thinking like, oh, should we jump off that roof? And I might get hurt, and you try it and you hurt your leg or you break your leg, but and like you're figuring out how to live in your body and live in the world, and you're figuring so much stuff out that we never had to think about. It just was like, that's always the way it always was. And as a parent now, that's like kind of, I mean, as a kid, so basically the book says that went away. And now, man, if you let your kids walk down the street without a parent and go into a 7-Eleven, somebody might call Child Protective Services on you.
Well, and you made the comment earlier on, the few things that ever makes me mad, and you didn't say this at all, but I do hear that, well, Acton works for our kids, but not their kids. And, you know, there's a racial, a socioeconomic, there's a nastiness when I hear that at a cocktail party, which is why I don't ever go to cocktail parties. but the one thing I will say is, from what I've seen with lots of West Austin, you know, wealthy parents, I think parental dysfunction is positively correlated with income, not negatively correlated. So the idea that people that have money, you know, don't have family problems, we all have family problems. Everybody's got issues. I mean, you know, and so, I don't think this works for the coddled, like you say, or, you know, for the privileged. It works for people who are willing to let their children go out and learn how life really is. And life can be hard, and it's, you know, and you persevere over the challenges. You know, life's really unfair sometimes, but if you look at life like that, it just gets more and more unfair. If you go out and try to make something of it, it becomes a lot more fun.
And again, I'm wearing my ideological priors on my sleeve here. The only thing my son has heard about fairness is that the world is not fair. We have these conversations all. He's turned out to be, much to my pleasure, a super philosophical kind of kid. He's
also a very optimistic, happy. I mean, you know, he really does have a glass half full view of the world, which is delightful to be around. My guess is, by the way, that's mostly temperament. You know, you get credit for not crushing that, but that's a natural thing. He's blessed with it.
He's always been, we call him like the Buddha, because he's a very even-keeled kid. But something I noticed,
you can beat that out of him, though. I mean, my point is, you get great credit for not screwing that up. Well, you know, it's great that that's his natural, but you can, you know, that's, as parents, my job is not to screw something up, and then they're going to become who they're going to become. And you've allowed Matteo to become.
Well, it's funny. The other, again, like Bryan Caplan's maybe one of my favorite economists. He has another book called Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids. And the thesis of the book is have lots of kids, because, you know, people will not have kids because, like, oh, it's expensive, or I don't know, I have to plan it, I got to worry. And I'm actually on the younger side. I'm 41 and Matteo's 13. And, you know, I was probably on the young side of my peers. When he was born, I was, you know, 28. My dad was 23.
Yeah.
And the selfish reason to have more kids is, don't worry about it. There's not that much you can do.
Yeah.
Like, it's not really, they're going to be who they're going to be. And he relies on all these twin studies. As
right. I think the more you have, the more you realize that, and you can kind of give up. You know, and you're just like, okay, it's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay, or they're going to have problems, and you're going to do your best. But, you know, it's not all on you. And the thing and I know you've been so generous with your time, so I want to start to wrap things up together. But one of the things about Acton, to come back to this sense of coddling, is that, you know, the kid that I so exciting to me about the growth that's happening with the school is that it is now hard, if you are a parent who sees this problem of your kids becoming of young adults today who are now fragile, who are like, they're adults, they could be drafted, they could be working, and they put their hands over their ears like an infant and scream and yell and say, no, I can't hear you, whenever somebody offers an opinion that offends their sensibilities or whatever.
Well, or they end up on your couch after college for 10 years because they can't bear to go out and get turned down for a job.
Yeah, or realize that, like I used to say, you know, when I went to film school and I got out and I was on an early film set, and the AD said, I never hire anybody from NYU. And I almost went to NYU film school. And I said, why? I mean, it's one of the best film schools. They come out and they think they're directors. You're not a director when you come out of film school. You're a production assistant. Go get me coffee. Yeah. And my dad is a surgeon, but he's kind of like he's a tough guy. He's like, you know, let's go lay some tile. What's your problem? Yeah. And I learned that from him, and I thank him for it, because it's, you know, you know, you want me to take out the trash? I'm going to do the best trash taken out you've ever seen. And so, you know, how do you make your kids anti-fragile? How do you make it so that they overcome adversity and come out the other end stronger? You know, what would, you know, we've in this time of sticks and stones may break your bones, but speech is violence. I mean, it's the craziest thing in the world. And so when I look at Acton, I see, and I know it's a lot to put on the school because it shouldn't be the school's job, but you've set up a system where, at least within the constraints of what it is he's there to do, my son can sink or swim and has to figure it out.
Yeah, and in a really relatively safe place, right? I mean, like the bad stuff that happens feels bad, but if he tells a lie, he gets sent home for a day and has to come back and apologize. We're all going to tell a lie. And we had one parent that said, thank goodness it happened now and not on his tax return 10 years from now. Well, let me end with one story that I think sums up everything about this, because, you know, we can think about coddling and we think about overparenting, but what I really want to focus on is the magnificence when you remove all this. Because what we keep being surprised about over and over again is just how extraordinary these young people are. They can learn at 10 times the rate. They become kind. They learn to become great writers. I mean, you focus on the few negatives, you forget the positives. And so we had one of our Acton owners in the orientation before last, about 6 weeks ago. And we normally don't allow an educator to open an Acton. It's almost always parents who haven't been educated. This fellow had a background in education, but his own children were going to go to the school, to the Acton. And I said, what have you learned from the day of being on campus, of seeing this? And he said, it's as if I had spent my whole life studying tigers, believing I was a tiger expert. But I had always been studying tigers in cages. Now I have seen tigers in the real world, and I realize what magnificent creatures they are. And I realize I know nothing about tigers at all. And that's the truth, is young people are magnificent creatures. They are amazing at what they can do. They will fail, they will stumble, they'll get back up, but they are extraordinary if you just let them free. With responsibility, with consequences. You know, it's not utopia, but the impact of magnificent tigers set free, I'll never forget his words, because he summed up the reason that I'm glad our two boys went there.
I can't think of a better way to end our conversation, Jeff. Thanks so much for spending the time with me.
It's a delight to be with you.
Thanks for listening to the Emergent Order podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting app. If you're interested in being a guest, shoot us an email at podcast@emergentorder.com. Our producer is Jesse Bennett. Thanks again, and speak to you next time.